dominated by, I was going to say Russians. They're not Russians. The Klitschko brothers are Ukrainians. They've dominated the heavyweight division for some years, and America are still searching for another heavyweight champion, and the last one was really Evander Holyfield, and that was 12 years ago, which of course has changed the image of heavyweight boxing completely. I mean, I've been very fortunate. I covered the golden years, what I consider the golden years of heavyweights. Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, George Foreman, Ken Norton, Jerry Coy, you could go on and on and on. Great heavyweights who all fought each other, and that's why it became the golden years. And then of course we had Mike Tyson came along and revived the heavyweight division and created worldwide interest in it. And again, I was very fortunate because when after Ali, the heavyweight division dipped, but of course we then had the golden age of the welterweights and the middleweights, Hearns, Hagler, Leonard, Duran, and they kept the boxing going. I was very fortunate. They fought each other 9 times, and I managed to cover 7 of those fights. So yes, I had a very, very good career covering some of the great fighters who ever lived. I think today there's only a couple of fighters I think would have lived in that era and been a problem to those guys I've just mentioned, and that of course is Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Pacquiao. The rest of them, of course, you know, when you get to my age, you always look back and think that your young years covering the sport were the best years, and of course the modern boxing guys would argue with me about that. But I can't see, only Mayweather I think would have had a chance with Leonard. But then, of course, I'm of a different generation.
Well, do you feel it's almost evolutionary? It seems we all tend to look back year after year. Here, I know we speak about what's gone on in the world of boxing and to all the great fights, but we all seemingly always go backwards and talk about that. I don't know if it's social. I know that some speak of the UFC, the Ultimate Fighting world, but most of those guys were wrestlers that ventured in.
I'll be quite honest, I know little or nothing about UFC. I'm not disparaging it, I'm not interested in it, and it doesn't interest me as a sport, to be honest, although I take my hat off to any guys who compete in that form of martial art. It's very difficult to compare one era to another, I realise that. But you just look at the little guys that covered Ruben Olivares, Alex Arguello, Cesar Chavez. I mean, they're absolutely outstanding fighters, and they would have been champions in any era.
It's almost like the mold was broke. It's hard to find that next generation that could even carry that torch. And then we've talked once, and they said it maybe in the amateur levels, it lost a lot of steam over the years, that the U.S. amateur program didn't really fulfill its levels that it should have.
Well, of course, when you think that in the London Olympics, the United States did win a gold medal. I don't think they won they won a bronze, I believe, which is unheard of in years before, when again, the United States, just take the '84 games in Los Angeles, they dominated and won most of the gold medals, and that was the year of Breeden and those guys. But I suppose the young men have different outlets now. I mean, the big guys, they want to play football and they want to play basketball because the rewards there are as great, if not greater, than they can win. I mean, the World Heavyweight Championship was always known as the biggest prize in sport, but not anymore. The guys who play golf earn more money than the heavyweight champion in the world. The footballers and the basketball players, the ball players earn more money than the heavyweight champion in the world. The world has changed.
Have any questions out here for Colin? Yeah, a couple of them.
Good afternoon, Colin.
My old friend from London, Bob Williams.
Colin, obviously being one of the best British journalists, who do you think is likely to be next Hall of Famer from Great Britain? We turned out many great world champions, in your opinion.
Well, I think maybe even the next year might be his year. Joe Calzaghe, who went 46 fights unbeaten and was the world super middleweight champion, a brilliant boxer. And I think Carl Froch will have a chance of becoming a Hall of Famer in years to come.
And another question right here.
Congratulations, Colin.
Thank you.
Just curious what your thoughts are. It seems when people suggest Mayweather moving up, like so many other welterweight champions did, moving up to fight middleweight champion Sergio Martinez, so many Mayweather fans are just aghast at the idea that Martinez is too big for Mayweather. What do you think about that, especially considering Martinez's last fight and how it looks like his movement isn't what it used to be?
Well, he gave Martinez a boxing lesson. He's given a lot of people a boxing lesson. And now, of course, he's going to fight Alvarez on September 14, who is a middleweight. So it's going to be very interesting to see how he handles I think he's 22, unbeaten Mexican, and a lot of people think that he's going to be one of the all-time great fighters. But Mayweather's very clever, not only in the ring, outside the ring. He's fighting Alvarez at 152 pounds. So therefore, he's got every chance of winning, and I believe he'll be too clever for Alvarez, as he's been too clever for everybody else so far. The fight we all wanted to see, of course, is never going to happen now, is him and Pacquiao. And I said a few years ago that he would have beaten Pacquiao. Defensively, he's one of the greatest fighters I've ever seen. Yeah. And he's very, very difficult to know. Although, to be fair, Cotto gave him a lot of problems in his penultimate.
Couple of questions here. Hello. How you doing? Yeah. Did you ever have an incident or two when you wrote something about somebody and you didn't like it? Any situation? I'm just curious. A couple stories.
All the time. You see, it's human nature. It's my job not only to write about the sport and as a spectacle, but also it's my job to criticise when I think it is necessary. And people, you can write 100 articles about a fighter in praise of him, and he'll never say a word to you. You write one article criticising him, and I'm talking about Britain now, he's either on the phone to you or he's on the phone to your office complaining about the criticism. It's human nature. It happened time and time again. I'll give you an example. We had a great light heavyweight called John Conte, who was a personal friend of mine. And John, if he was here now, would admit it. He went off to Wales. He started training in nightclubs. And he got a very lucky draw. And I said, if he'd only go back to training in the gym instead of a nightclub, he'd be much better off. And we had a great friendship, and we didn't speak for 2 years as a result of what I said. In the end, of course, he realised I was trying to be objective. So, to answer to your question, happens constantly.
Colin, question over here.
Hi.
Hi.
Congrats again.
Thank you.
Kind of a two-parter. One, do you think we'll ever actually find any footage of Harry Greb fighting? And do you think he could have taken less Thursday?
Well, Harry Greb, I'm old. I'm not that old. Harry Greb, they say, was arguably the greatest middleweight who ever lived. And if I'm right in saying he beat Gene Tunney, who was was it twice?
Twice.
Twice, exactly.
Really, the second.
And anybody to beat Gene Tunney twice knew one of knew a thing or two. But I can't possibly answer that hypothetical question. The second part of it. But Greg was obviously a great middleweight. As to finding footage, if Jim Jacobs and Bill Caton, who used to manage Mike Tyson, who had that fantastic film library, couldn't dig one up, nobody else will.
Kali, objectively, if you could, I know you've written stories of, like you said, the golden era of boxing, and then transitioning into the great middleweights, and so on and so on and so on. But it's always the typical question, and I'll ask it. But you deep inside you, all the writing you've done, all the fights you've seen. Somebody that just has it for you, who's the one?
Well, can I just answer that question? First of all, by telling you, it depends on what area you're writing about. Now, I'm old enough to have met Nat Fleischer, and we had a great sports writer in England called Frank Butler. Now, Fleischer, you ask Fleischer, who was the greatest heavyweight who ever lived? And he lived through the Muhammad Ali era. And he said, Jack Johnson, right? Frank Butler, who covered the Joe Louis era, and of course Ali, said Joe Louis was the greatest ever. For me, Muhammad Ali, I would always say was the greatest heavyweight who ever lived. I'm often asked the question, who is the greatest fighter you have ever seen? People expect me to say Ali. No. I'm talking about fighters I've seen in the flesh, not Sugar Ray Robinson on film. To me, the greatest fighter, pound for pound, I've ever seen in the flesh is Sugar Ray Leonard. He could do everything. He could box, he could fight, he was brave, he had a great chin. You look at Ali, he never hit to the body. He was a great counter puncher and of course a great personality, but he wasn't the all-round fighter, in my opinion, that Ray Leonard was. Sorry? What, Leonard? Because his management didn't want him to. It's like, why didn't Rocky Marciano fight Nino Valdez, who may well have knocked him out? Because his management said, we don't want it. You ask the fighters, the great champions, did they duck anybody? And they would say, we wouldn't duck anybody. It was the management team that ducked them.
Because Aaron Pryor, the year that Leonard was inducted, Aaron Pryor said, you ducked me, and Leonard said, no, I didn't duck you. And Pryor looked at him and said, yeah, you ducked me, and Leonard said, I ducked you. I mean, I actually heard him.
Yeah, okay. Maybe he didn't want an argument.
Maybe. That's true.
Listen,
I'm a married guy.
If Leonard came back to fight Marvin Hagler after being out of the ring 2 years, he wouldn't duck anybody. Pryor was a great fighter. How about that fight he had with Arquette? Do you remember that? Yeah.
Well, I think it's your point, Colin, and I think we can draw to points in history of why this fight never happened. And as we stated, the fight that we really all wanted to see, Mayweather-Pacquiao, never going to happen.
No.
So, in history, it'll go down as the greatest fight that never happened. So,
one of the many of them.
Yeah. So I think that seems to be a line that runs through boxing and its history.
I mean, you go through the heavyweight division when Dempsey was the champion. That was the time when they wouldn't allow black guys to fight for the heavyweight championship of the world. And a man called Wills could well have knocked out Jack Dempsey if he'd been given the opportunity.
I mean, I just say it's a good point of controversy, but it's true. I think it'll run itself through history. Let's get a question here.
I talked to a boxing writer one time. He said the two hardest fights to describe are the best he's ever seen and the worst he's ever seen. Now let me start. What's the best fight you've ever seen that you could put your pen down and say, how am I going to describe this? It's just so great.
Well, I'll tell you something. It's easier to write about a great fight than a dull one, believe me. when you don't forget in the era of 15-round fights, there were some real Lulus that scratch your head. What am I going to say about this rubbish? But two fights stand out for me. And I think, from a purist point of view, the greatest fight I've ever seen was the first Sugar Ray Leonard Roberto Duran fight in Montreal. It was a classic. It had everything. Not a drop of blood was spilled. There were no knockdowns. And yet, it was a fight I would show to every boxing club in the world as an example of what boxing is all about. And the other fights, two other fights to go. Muhammad Ali in the Rumble in the Jungle, when everybody thought that Foreman was going to put him in hospital. No doubt about that. And I'm going to boast now, I tipped Ali to win that fight in the 9th round. And I had a sports editor called Frank Nicklin who sent me a cable. And I was told there was a cable waiting for me, and I thought it was going to be congratulations. The fight ended in the 8th round, and the cable said very simply, why wrong round? And Frank sent me that cable to make sure I didn't get big-headed. That was his way of saying, all right, you came up with one, but don't get too big-headed. And the other fight, the most brutal fight I've ever seen, was the Thriller in Manila, the 3rd Ali Fraser fight. And the reason it was so brutal is because they were really short, and they couldn't get out of the way of each other. So they stood there for 14 rounds, hammering away. And it was the fight, of course, that the great Eddie Fudge pulled Fraser out at the end of the 14th round. So, because he feared for his welfare, for his health. Those are the fights that stick in the mind. No, they don't stick in the mind. You just forget about them. Yeah.
Colin, what have you been writing about recently?
I'm
got your passion.
I'm semi-retired, and I still write a column for my paper every 2 weeks. And tomorrow's column, which I wrote obviously before I left home, was about Archie Rigatti being in the Hall of Fame, being inducted on Sunday. Unfortunately, my career had ended, so I didn't know that. I only saw it on television, like maybe most of you guys. What a fighter.
And Colin, if you could, your sentiments on Carmen Basilio.
Well, I met Colin Basilio, came to London. He managed fighters for a while. He brought a fighter to London, and the British boxing fighters gave him lunch. And what a wonderful character he was. When you saw how he was that big, he won the world welterweight title and the world middleweight title. And of course, he hated Sugar Ray Robinson because Robinson wouldn't give him the 3rd fight. But, one of the all-time greats is, of course, it comes from here.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're so happy to have him, our 2013 Hall of Fame inductee, Colin Hart. We thank him for finishing off our ringside lectures today. He's going to be part of our opening ceremony, obviously.